Chapter 11 Kiss Go Home. Kiss Go Home. Kiss Go Home. We could hear the chants from the hotel room where we were all huddled together. Outside, a mob was picketing, holding up handwritten placards that read "Kiss Nights in Satan's Service" and "Hide Your Daughter's Kiss is Coming to Town." Some creative types had even dressed up a few dummies in our makeup and costume. When they began burning us in effigy, we knew that it was getting serious. "You're all going to spend the night in this one room," Bill was lecturing us. "After I leave, I want you to lock the door and then put the dresser in front of it. These people are irrational. There's no telling what they might do." We had just played a show in Asheville, North Carolina, under some duress. It seemed that one of the national evangelical Christian TV shows had decided that KISS stood for Nights in Satan's Service and that we were all agents of the devil. That was news to this Catholic boy, but you don't argue with Bill when you're in a town where every few miles you can see a huge billboard of a man in a white sheet, riding a white horse and carrying a cross, that reads, "Support your local clan." "Oh, and Gene," Bill hesitated before he left the room. "Don't you dare stick your dick in anyone down here. We have to get safely out of this town tomorrow." I was scared shitless. The Ku Klux Klan doesn't fuck around. I surely didn't want my skinny ass dragged outside and hung from a tree. I was so scared that I actually called my mother from the room. "Ma, I'm barricaded in a room in North Carolina. The KKK is picketing us." I was being a little dramatic, but that's me. "What's he talking about?" I heard my dad ask in the background. My mother made me promise that I'd call her first thing in the morning and let her know I was okay. We managed to leave town intact, but there was one irony. During our show that night, a bunch of girls showed up in leather masks and dominatrix-style bondage gear, and while we were playing, the crew got to fuck them. That's how strange America was back in 1977. It was a lot stranger, though, in Japan. In March of that year, we made our first foray over to the land of the rising sun. We flew over on a huge 747 that we called the Kiss Clipper. It even had the Kiss logo on its tail. Besides the band, we were carrying about 40 press people on an all-expenses paid junket. We exited the plane, in full makeup, to the most ecstatic reception I'd ever seen. It was Beatlemania, only much more high-pitched. Thousands and thousands of fans had swarmed the airport and were screaming their heads off. The terminal was actually shaking from the press of people. We jumped into a limo, but so many girls were hanging off the hood and banging on the windows that we had to jump out and get into a bigger van to escape the airport. It was no better when we tried to walk in the streets. Hundreds of screaming fans followed us everywhere we went. As loud as the fans were on the street, they were quiet and docile during the shows. We didn't realize it was a cultural thing to listen to a song in silence, a way of showing respect. But when the song was over, they'd cheer and go crazy like any other audience. I had brought Lydia with me, so I missed out on the highlight of everyone else's trip. The promoter, Mr. Udo, took the other guys, except for Ace, who had his wife there, too, to a traditional bathhouse where you'd lie on a rubber sheet, have hot oils massaged all over your body, and get an unbelievable happy ending. According to Paul and Criss, the hand job was so good it was almost hard stopping. I had to content myself with going to Kittyland, the most over the top toy store I'd ever seen. I bought lasers, iron dragons, pistols, and pellet guns. Most of us bought the pellet guns, so the next morning at 5 a.m. we had a shoot out in our hallway. Sean was nursing his welts for days after that shoot out. We had some other fights that weren't as much fun. We would always argue over song selection, but one night in Japan the argument escalated to the point that the dressing room door was locked. But we went out and tore through a killer 2-hour show for the fans. We were really on a roll. We were voted the #1 rock band for 3 years straight, 1977 to 1979, in the prestigious Gallup poll. And we were spewing out product like crazy. In June of 1977 we released our 6th album, Love Gun. I always liked working with Eddie Kramer, but this wasn't really a band effort. Except for Love Gun, which I loved to play, I thought the songs were pretty mediocre. My song Hooligan was butchered. Ace's song Shock Me, which was inspired by his near electrocution on stage one night, featured his first lead vocal as a member of Kiss. I was very happy that he was finally getting a chance to sing, but let's face it, Ace might just have the worst voice in the world. I thought the best thing about the album was the cardboard gun that came inside. But it didn't seem to matter, the album went platinum just weeks after it was released. We could do no wrong. In fact, we were doing so well, our business managers told us to go out and buy houses. Lydia and I took a ride out to Greenwich, Connecticut, with Criss one day in May of 1977. We drove down one road and it kept winding around, and all of a sudden, there was our dream house. It was a European-style chalet with stone floors, beamed ceilings, window boxes, balconies, a big medieval front door, and an 8-foot fireplace. I thought Lydia was going to faint. The owners were Scandinavians, and they had these gorgeous blonde kids running around with a whole new litter of sheepdogs. It was like a movie set. Criss and I told Lydia not to act too excited in front of the owners, and we started negotiating. They were asking $375,000, which was a steal. We told them that we'd make an offer, and then we went for a bite to eat and to look over some other properties, even though we knew this was the one. At the restaurant, I looked across the street and saw a Mercedes dealership. "Hey, Criss, can I get a Mercedes too?" I asked. "Sure, why not," he said. I marched over there and picked out a chocolate, brown 450 SL with a camel interior. "How does it feel?" Criss asked me on the ride home. It felt like an epiphany. All those times that I didn't go out and play ball with the kids, all those hours of practicing on the drums, had finally paid off. With a mansion and a Mercedes, both bought on the same day, I had more than I had ever dreamed of. The Love Gun tour started up in Canada in July. We had rented a twin-prop Army transport jet that had been converted and outfitted with beds so we could get laid. Jean was a horrible air traveler. After a few flights, we all developed a fear of flying because our pilots turned out to be party animals. At first all we knew was that we would hear them fighting in the cockpit. Then we started landing at the wrong airports and almost hitting the guardrails on the landing strips. Eventually someone told us that our pilots had been at every after-party, drinking champagne and doing blow. Great, now our lives were in the hands of two coked-out pilots. The more successful we got, the more fragile the bonds between us became. In September we went into the studio to sweeten a few new live songs for our second live album, but Ace rarely bothered to show up, he was so fucked up. Bob Kulick had to replicate all of Ace's leads. Even Gene and Paul were fighting by then, mostly over the covers of the magazines that always seemed to feature Gene in a prominent position and relegated the rest of us to the sidelines. This was especially true in Japanese music magazines because Gene wore his hair in that samurai bun. Jealousy pervaded everything we did. Gene came up with a great description of it. Whenever we found out about a new status symbol, whether it was a car, a toy, a television, or a house, Gene would tell Bill, "Buy 4." It was especially true for Paul, because he really was a chameleon. I was the first to get a Rolex in the band. Next thing you know, Paul's got the presidential Rolex. And that still wasn't good enough, so he got the presidential with all the diamonds around it. Here we were, four guys who started out putting shoe polish on our faces and dyeing our hair in a bathtub in the village, and now we're vying for the most expensive watch. It was sad to see how greed and pride and ego were suffocating the band. We were making so much money we didn't know what to do with it all. In November, Howard Marks showed up to a show in San Antonio with papers for all of us to sign. We were investing in coal mines and oil rigs as tax shelters, moves that would later bite us in the ass. In 1977 alone, our gross income was over $10 million. So Bill started thinking really big. He wanted to break us out of having to tour all the time by making a movie. Then he thought we should each do a solo album to reinforce the idea that we were for larger than life superstars. Of course, Gene and Paul were all for these grandiose ideas. Ace and I weren't so sure. Alive 2 was released on October 24th. Bill was pushing for another live album for a pragmatic reason. The idea of not having to be in the studio together for all those hours made sense to everyone, he diplomatically told one journalist. The Alive 2 tour was actually fun, mostly thanks to Fritz Postlethwaite. He had worked his way up from being a monitor man who was routinely spit on by Gene to being the top banana. He deserved it. Fritz was a short blonde Eastern European brainiac. His big round glasses earned him the nickname Poindexter after that cartoon character. Every day he would come around with a chart of everyone's biorhythms. He was as crazy as we were. After some time with us, he bought a mini chainsaw and he'd chainsaw the hotel furniture when he got frustrated. We got home in time to celebrate Christmas in our new home. On Christmas Eve I really got into the Christmas spirit. I had Nat King Cole on the stereo, I was drinking a scotch and wearing my Santa Claus pajamas. It's a Wonderful Life was playing silently on the TV. Of course, we had some blow and Lydia was snorting it and talking on the phone to her annoying cousin Phyllis. With every line, Lydia stayed on the phone for another half hour talking about bullshit. Soon the movie was over, I was on to my fourth scotch, and that much scotch would make me crazy. Lydia was still yapping away on the phone in the other room. And I hate phones. Is this what it's all about? I thought to myself. Is this what I broke my ass on the road for? To sit here on Christmas Eve listening to Nat King Cole by my fucking self, looking at the fucking tree? Whoop, duh, fucking, do. She could be talking to her fucking cousin any fucking day of the year. I got champagne on ice and we're alone on Christmas and she's talking for 3 hours about a fucking dress? This is fucking bullshit. I opened the drawer next to the couch and pulled out my nickel-plated 38 snub nose. Fuck this. I screamed, and I shot the Christmas tree 2 times. Merry motherfucking Christmas, I said, and then I put the gun back in the drawer. Lydia came running into the room. Oh, you're off the phone now? Now can we enjoy Christmas? We were back on the road in January when we got the official word that we were all millionaires. We learned that from watching an Edwin Newman special on NBC called The Land of Hype and Glory. We had been interviewed for that show, and Bill was adamant that Gene do the talking because Newman was a genius and Bill didn't want us to look stupid or crazy or drugged out. On the show they were talking about these 4 crazy kids from Queens and Brooklyn and the Bronx. You may think they're clowns and we may laugh at them, but they're all millionaires. I looked over at Lydia. Wow, I'm a millionaire. That was the first time we had official confirmation. We had been told in one of our meetings with Marx and Glickman that we would be rich beyond our dreams, but this put the icing on the cake. It's not like we had time to enjoy being millionaires. In March the tour went back to Japan, where we would spend the entire 8 days in Tokyo. That gave Ace enough time to dig up some authentic Nazi SS uniforms complete with armbands, medals, boots, and lugers. Ace, Paul, and I put them on and posed for pictures. We got fucked up on sake and then Ace and I paraded down the hallway, banging on the cruise doors, yelling, "We demand to see your papers." Then Ace and I did something really wrong, even for us. We knocked on Jean's door. Jean opened the door. "You will give us your name, rank, and serial number, or we will throw your Jewish ass into the ovens," we said, and we cracked up like two kids. Jean's expression didn't change. He didn't smile, he didn't yell, he just stared at us with a look that could kill. We knew we crossed the line, and we went back to Ace's room. We were taking off the uniforms when Paul came in. "What the fuck were you thinking? Don't you know that Jean's grandmother died in the fucking ovens?" Paul said. He told us that Jean's mother was a beautician in the camps who did hair for the Nazis' wives, and they made her watch while they put her mother in a gas chamber. We were devastated. Why didn't that prick tell us that before? We marched right back to Jean's room to apologize. While we were in Tokyo, we spent a lot of time shopping for all those great toys that you could only get in Japan. But Jean hardly came out of his room at all. He was too busy talking on the phone with his new love, Cher. Jean had met Cher because Chastity was a big Kiss fan. From the first time we met Cher, everyone loved her. She was sensitive and smart and she really treated Jean well. Cher taught Jean how to relate to a woman for the first time in his life. Cher was totally into Jean. One night, months later, we were sitting in her room on the road somewhere and she said, "You know, Petey, I would marry Jeannie, I love him that much. But I don't think that's going to happen." She was right on that count. Despite what the press said, everybody in the band loved Cher. Paul, the chameleon that he was, loved her so much that he started dating her sister. The only thing that bugged me was that Jean was getting tons of press because he was going out with a major star like Cher. Every time I picked up a paper, you'd see a picture of Cher and a picture of Jean trying to hide his face. So I must admit, I got jealous. Eventually Jean moved to California to live with Cher. Again the press made it sound like we were all pissed off by that decision. But I didn't feel threatened by Jean leaving New York. I was personally happy he was gone. Around this time, we put out our first greatest hits album, Double Platinum. The ironic thing was that we had nothing to do with it. Sean had gone into a studio for a couple of weeks and remixed all our hits. It was just as well, by then we couldn't stand being in the same studio together for that much time. Bill thought that we needed to get some product out because we were about to embark on two of Bill's grandiose ideas, the TV movie and the 4 solo albums that would all be released on the same day. I had no idea that going to Rod Stewart's party in Hollywood would forever change my life, but it did. It's funny because I almost passed on the party. We were taking the noon flight to LA to begin preparations for our first movie, Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park. Allison Steele, a popular New York disc jockey, was on board and had organized a card game. She took me for a couple of grand and I was tired and jet-lagged, so I checked into my suite at L'Hermitage Hotel in Beverly Hills and went straight to my room to get some room service and a good night's sleep. Then I heard the knock. "Hey, Petey," Ace said. "Come to Rod Stewart's party. There's gonna be prime chicks there." Allison Steele had invited all of us to this party while we were playing cards. "I don't know," I said. Then Paul swung by. "You know that you're going to regret not going when we come back and tell you how great it was. You're going to hate us," he said. He was right. So I took a quick shower, put on a really cool velvet jacket and velvet pants, and teased my hair up to look like rods. I had rented a white Rolls for the time we were in L.A. So me and Rosie, my bodyguard, made a bit of an entrance. We walked past a huge gate and I immediately thought, this is what a Hollywood party should look like. There were all these people hanging around a big pool, drinking, snorting blow, falling into the pool. We started roaming around and Allison introduced us to Rod, like he gave a fuck. Then I met Ronnie Wood, and he was pretty nice to me. There were so many stars roaming around, you couldn't even count them. At one point I looked over and saw Hugh Hefner surrounded by 10 knockout girls, each one better than the other. Just then, I looked out on the dance floor and there were 2 of Heg's girls dancing very sensuously with each other. They both were terrific looking, but I fixated on the blonde and suddenly my libido was just blasting through my pants. Go get her for me, I instructed Rosie. I was half in the bag by then. I'm not going to do that, he said. Rosie was an Hell's Angel, so I decided not to push it. By then the blonde and I were making eye contact, so I figured that sometimes you had to do things for yourself. I went right onto the dance floor, grabbed her hand, and pulled her away. I gotta get to know you, I said. I've never seen such a beautiful woman in my life. We started talking. She said her name was Deborah Jensen and that she was a Playboy centerfold and a lingerie model. I didn't even comprehend half the things she was saying. I just felt like a little kid, drinking in her face. I had never met anyone that gorgeous. Of course, I told her I was the drummer for Kiss. I hate that band, Deborah said. They wear makeup and look like maniacs. I was really bummed out. But I think you're cute, she said. Whew, I still had a chance. At one point she had to pee and the bathrooms were all occupied, so we went outside the house and she peed in the bushes. When she came back, I was determined not to lose this chick, so I invited her back to the hotel. She hemmed and hawed and told me she was there with all these other girls, she even brought me over to meet Heg. But I was persistent. I gave her a few lines of coke and then I slipped her a Quaalude. It was like leading a donkey to water. Once she got into that white Rolls, there were no complaints. When we got to my suite, I put on a show for her. I donned this tacky red designer robe and I strutted in like I was Errol Flynn. How do you like the robe? I said, trying to be suave. It's an Yves Saint Laurent. Later she told me that was one of the funniest things she'd ever seen. Here was a girl who knew her fashion. She was into the top tier of designers. Designers, like Halston. But she didn't want to hurt my feelings. It's a really nice robe. We fucked 9 times that night, my all-time record. We fucked everywhere and anywhere we could in that suite. We even used the bidet. I had no idea what a bidet was. I was totally in love. I just wanted to give this girl the fucking world, nobody had ever fucked me like that. I was smitten. I couldn't believe I was with a Playboy playmate. Suddenly Lydia felt like a high school sweetheart to me. This was not true love. My dick was in love, not my heart, and drugs didn't help. I didn't want to stop touching her or kissing her. I couldn't stand the thought of her leaving. The next day she got up to leave and put her phone number on the back of an 8x10 photo of herself. She signed it to Peter, love, Deborah Jensen, like she was the star. Later she would tell me that she didn't even plan on ever seeing me again. She was moving on. She had just done the January centerfold and she was getting ready to do more covers. But I was convinced that this woman loved me. What a delusional little Brooklyn Guinea asshole I was. Here was this California girl who had slept with Heg, who was way ahead of me. I had been with a lot of chicks on the road, but I had never had Beverly Hills pussy before. And there's a huge difference between Beverly Hills pussy and road pussy. Beverly Hills pussy is about money, road pussy was for free. Of course I called her that night. She said she was going to Vegas with her girlfriend Patty McGuire, a Playmate of the Year who wound up marrying Jimmy Connors, the tennis player. I was begging her, no, you don't want to go to Vegas. I'm starting a movie tomorrow. Come visit me on the set. I figured that would win her over for sure. I was taking no chances. I had finally found one of those centerfold girls that I used to jerk off to hanging on the wall of that butcher shop back in Brooklyn when I was a kid. Pussy could be just as devastating and scary and deep and dark as any other vice. I was about to find out firsthand. I was going into the shooting of the film with mixed feelings to begin with. I had always wanted to act, but the plot of this film was that we had to use our superpowers to save a California amusement park from destruction at the hands of an evil inventor. It was the lamest thing I could have imagined. When I was told that we had to fight the Wolfman one day and Frankenstein the next, my brain started to hurt. Why should I have powers to levitate things with my hands? What did any of this have to do with rock and roll? Our fans were going to think that we were pansies. I became a drummer in a rock and roll band because I was a rebel. I was fighting the system, fighting the Vietnam War. Now we were just buffoons. What happened to the guys who got up there and did God of Thunder and Black Diamond? All of a sudden we're doing slapstick? I knew right then that my career as a rock musician was down the toilet. Before the script was written, we met with the screenwriters so they could get a feel for how we talked. Ace refused to even talk to them. He just mumbled his non sequiturs like I kills 'em all or 13 for a dozen and made his crazy parrot sounds. So when the script came in, Ace had no lines. Once in a while he'd just go, "Urgh." He was furious. On the first day of shooting, our first scene was to be filmed around a pool. I was sitting up in a big lifeguard's chair, wearing a long, crazy robe. I think my line was something like, Jean was an only child, or maybe it was, matey, let's cut her throat. They were both equally stupid. I was ready to deliver the line and I looked over to the side and my heart leaped into my throat. Deb was standing there next to Fritz and Rosie. She had cancelled Vegas and come to the set. She was a vision in a white top with a black skirt and black nylons. Who gave a shit about the movie anymore? I just wanted to get in her pants. Deb coming to the set spelled doom for the film. I had to be on set every day at 6 in the morning, and we would stay up all night and fuck and do blow until 5 when I got the call that the car was outside waiting for me. Deb had just turned 20, so she could take it, but I was in my 30s. The later we stayed up fucking and drugging, the more I forgot my lines and started slurring my words. And the more I did that and pissed off the director, the more I hated being there. Ace felt the same contempt for the film. We would visit each other in our trailers and we both stocked our refrigerators with wall green bottles of Heineken. We'd drink and snort coke all day while we waited for our calls. That was the worst part of movie making, sitting around for sometimes 10 hours before they'd be ready for the scene. I wasn't accustomed to that kind of discipline, especially when we were in our full makeup, waiting hours to do a 5-minute scene. We'd get so fucked up that when we finally got the call, we'd stumble out of the trailer slurring our words and hitting the walls and knocking props over. One night the director wanted to meet with me privately and read me the riot act. He was lecturing me, telling me that I had to cool it with the drugs and stop getting high with Ace because we were getting behind on the budget. Yeah, fuck you, I said. I don't care what happens with this fucking movie. I'm a drummer in a rock band and I don't give a shit about you or Hannah, Barbara or the Wolfman and Dracula, you can all go fuck yourselves. I got up and walked out and left him sitting there. The next day he came up to me on the set. "How are you feeling today, Peter?" he asked. "The same fucking way I felt yesterday," I said. All I had to look forward to was Deb visiting me. We would screw so much that my trailer was moving up and down constantly. One day she came over and asked if I would fuck her with my makeup on. We started banging and there was a mirror right near us and I looked at it and saw my face and I freaked out. My makeup was running, my whiskers were all askew, the black and silver had rubbed off on her face, the lipstick was all over the place. I just looked demonic. I realized that I was out of control, that I had lost my fucking mind and that I was fucking up the show. But I didn't care. After a few weeks of shooting, I had had enough. I walked off the set and went back to the hotel. I sat there and figured that I had a lot of money now. I had a beautiful new girlfriend. I was about to do a solo album. What did I need this shit for? I was a big enough star that I could put together my own band and do well. So I called our lawyer, Paul Marshall, and told him to fly out to LA. Because I wanted out of the band. "You're out of your fucking mind, Peter," he screamed. "We're in the middle of making a movie. You can't just leave this." Paul and Bill and Howard Marks took the next flight out and we sat down and had a big meeting with everyone. And everyone bullshitted me again. They told me that the film would really take the band to new heights, that it would cost millions if I walked away, that if we could just get through this film we'd do our solo projects and everything would be okay. But it wasn't. It was really over by then. Even Gene and Paul knew it. They had had enough of my and Ace's crap and we certainly had had enough of theirs. We weren't a band anymore. They kept working on me, and I agreed to finish the movie and then we'd see where we were at. So I went back to the set, and now it was time to shoot the Beth scene. It was a love scene, and they were going to let me fake play an acoustic guitar. The original script had me alone singing the song to the leading lady. But I got to the set and the script had changed. All of a sudden Paul was playing the guitar, the band was sitting around the pool, and I was sitting there with my dick in my hand singing the song to her. What happened to me with the guitar? "Well, everybody knows you can't play," Paul said. "How the fuck do you know that?" "You mean everyone on the set knows that because you fucking told them. You're just afraid I'm going to get some camera time." That was how the arguments would start. So Paul got the guitar part, and the next thing I knew, all they needed was the music. They didn't need the vocals. I went ballistic. I threatened to quit again, so they put the scene back, but it wasn't good. Kiss doesn't sit around a pool, with me resting my boot on a diving board, singing Beth to some chick who wasn't even particularly hot, with Paul and his pouty lips playing acoustic. My next big scene involved me opening a box to reveal a talisman inside. In the movie, our lair had just been robbed and we were afraid that the talisman had been stolen. I was supposed to say, "Wow, they didn't get the talisman," but I was so loaded it kept on coming out tall, ease, man, like in that Harry Belafonte song Day, oh. "Peter, it's tall, is, man," the director would say. "Okay, right," I said, and they'd roll tape again. "Wow, they didn't get the talisman," I said. Paul and Gene started dancing and singing, "Hey, Mr. Tally man, tally me bananas. I lost it. You fucking assholes, how dare you make fun of me," I screamed, and threw the box against the wall, shattering it. I walked off the set and Ace started going, "Urgh, urgh." "I guess that's a wrap," the director said. "Let's Try this again tomorrow. I had one big action scene where Ace and I were taking on two masked samurai fighters. I was supposed to grab my attacker, flip him around, and give him a couple of punches to the face while I was ducking his sword thrusts. We started shooting and I was ducking the sword and then I swung at him and boom, I broke right through his mask, hit him in the eye, and knocked him to the ground. Cut, the director yelled. Buddy Joe Hooker, the head stunt man, came running up to me. Are you crazy? Where the fuck did you get the idea you could punch one of my men? He said. Nobody told me I wasn't supposed to hit him, I said innocently. I really believed that those guys hit each other but they knew how to slide and take a punch. My man has a black eye from you, Hooker fumed. You're lucky I don't punch you out right now. You do that once more, we'll stop this movie. Not much of a threat, really. I would have gone back and cracked a bottle of champagne and celebrated if they cancelled the movie. But I did feel terrible about injuring the guy. I kept apologizing every day, and eventually they made me an honorary stuntman and gave me a plaque. On May 19th we shot a huge outdoor concert at Magic Mountain, the amusement park where the movie took place. It was a free show and there were Kiss banners everywhere. This was to be the climax where we battle the bad guys on stage, knock them out, and the audience would go crazy. At this point I was ready to shoot myself. I would have rather watched Cal Worthington's used car ads on an endless loop than do this movie. We got to the last song, Black Diamond, during which the drums levitated. We shot take after take, and the drums were going up and down, and I just flipped out. I took my sticks and threw them into the drums and stormed off in my limo with Rosie. They had to get some middle-aged stagehand to throw on one of my costumes and sit in my seat. They continued filming from different angles, so you couldn't really tell that it wasn't me. By then Ace had also walked and they used a black guy as his double, which seemed to piss him off. By then Lydia had come out to visit. Of course I kept her and Deb apart at all costs. On May 27th we wrapped the shooting, so we had a party back at L'Hermitage. We were playing a really fun card game called AC/Deucey and at 5 in the morning, I had just won a pot that was worth $7,000. I don't know if you've ever seen 7 grand in hundreds and fifties and twenties, but it was an impressive sight. When I won that pot, everybody quit for the night. But I was jazzed. And stoned. It was my last night in L.A. The next day Lydia and I were supposed to fly back to New York. I was dreading that because I was so in love with Deb that I couldn't bear the thought of leaving. So I decided to get in my leased 928 Porsche and go for a drive. It was Fritz's birthday that night, so he said he wanted to go with me. We got into the car and we started racing around town and I wound up driving over to Deb's house. We walked into her house carrying a half-full magnum of Dom Perignon. In my pocket I had a bag of ludes and at least an 8-ball of coke. I tried to persuade Deb to come out and keep partying, but she was having none of it. I think you guys should stay here, she said. I know your wife is at the hotel, but you can call her. You're really too smashed to get back into that car. That would be a big mistake. I knew that if I stayed there I would get laid, and then I'd never want to go back to the hotel for the flight to New York, so we decided to leave. Plus Fritz was urging me to go because he didn't really like Deb. His allegiance was to Lydia. He was being responsible. So against my libido's judgment, we left. On the way back to the car, Fritz asked me if he could drive. Hey, it was his birthday, so I said, why not? He got behind the wheel and put on his seat belt. Me, I didn't buckle up. We started driving. Deb's place was only about 5 minutes away from the hotel, but we seemed to be driving in circles and it was taking forever to get back. It turned out that we had driven all the way to Marina del Rey. The sun was coming up and Fritz turned onto Sepulveda Boulevard and gunned that car up to 90 miles per hour. I popped an Eagles cassette into the player and Hotel California started to play. The next thing I remember was seeing the white light. But it wasn't just any white light, it was the warmest, deepest, most breathtakingly pure white light I had ever seen in my life. I felt totally comfortable and at peace. And I seemed to be moving toward that light, getting closer and closer, and the thought of that was making me feel better than any drug I had ever taken.